April 7th, 1945, Tokyo Bay, Empire of Japan. As dawn breaks over the Japanese home islands, 91 North American P-51D Mustangs from the 15th and 21st Fighter Groups approach their rendezvous point. In the cockpit of his Mustang, Major James B. Tapp firmly grips the control stick. His 6 wing-mounted 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns are loaded with armor-piercing incendiary rounds. The early model P-51Ds are equipped with 500 rounds for each inboard gun and 270 for the center and outboard positions, totaling 2,800 rounds. Subsequent variants would reduce this to 400 rounds per inboard gun for enhanced reliability, resulting in a total of 1,980 rounds. Below, Mount Fuji rises majestically against the clear morning sky, its snow-capped peak serving as a navigation point for pilots throughout the mission. The morning sun casts long shadows over the Japanese countryside, revealing a patchwork of rice fields, villages, and military installations that had never before encountered American fighters. This mission is unprecedented to escort B-29 Subaru fortresses deep into the Japanese homeland from a base 750 miles away, a distance that military planners had deemed impossible for single-engine fighters just 2 years prior. At EU-700 hours, over 100 Japanese interceptors converge on the American formation. Through the morning haze, a sight emerges that shocks Japanese pilots to their core. Single-engine American fighters over Tokyo, a scenario their commanders had assured them was impossible. The psychological impact is immediate and devastating. These are not carrier-based Navy fighters with limited range, but land-based Army Air Force fighters that have somehow traversed 750 miles of open ocean to appear over the Imperial capital. Leading the Japanese defense are pilots flying the Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate, known as the Frank, Japan's fastest and most advanced fighter, alongside older Ki-43 Hayabusas, Ki-44 Shoki, Kai-61 Hien, and the Navy's J-6 Mi-0 and N-1K-2J Shiden. The Kai-84 had the capability to outclimb and outmaneuver both the P-51 and the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt at specific altitudes and speeds. The subsequent events will illustrate the significant technological divide between the two nations' strategies in air warfare and explain why American industrial strength produced what numerous pilots would describe as the ideal long-range fighter aircraft. The North American P-51D Mustang made its debut in the Pacific Theater with a reputation already established in the skies over Europe, where it had significantly weakened the Luftwaffe and facilitated daylight bombing missions over Germany. Originally developed for export to Britain, the models that were modified by the British to incorporate Rolls-Royce Merlin engines evolved into America's most proficient wartime fighters. The transition from the Allison-powered early variants to the Merlin-powered masterpiece exemplified one of aviation's most successful international partnerships, combining American aerodynamic advancements with British engine technology. The combination of the iconic Merlin engine and the P-51 Mustang ultimately led to the creation of the P-51D, which equipped the U.S. Army Air Forces with a high-performance, high-altitude, long-range fighter capable of escorting heavy bomber formations all the way to Berlin and back. Remarkably, it could also fly from Iwo Jima to Tokyo and return. The Packard 5th 1650 U7 engine, a licensed version of the Rolls-Royce Merlin 66, produced 1,695 horsepower at takeoff with water injection, increasing to 1,720 horsepower under emergency warpower conditions. This two-stage, two-speed supercharged engine maintained high performance at altitudes where Japanese engines struggled due to their single-stage superchargers being unable to compress the thin atmosphere adequately. The P-51D achieved a maximum speed of approximately 440 mph at 25,000 feet, reached an operational ceiling of nearly 42,000 feet, and was equipped with 6 wing-mounted 0.50 in M2 Browning machine guns. The calculations regarding firepower were devastating and meticulously determined. 6 M2 Browning machine guns firing at a rate of 800 rounds per minute. This allowed the P-51D to deliver a total of 4,800 rounds per minute of concentrated firepower, equating to 80 rounds per second. Each armor-piercing incendiary round weighed 46 grams and traveled at a speed of 2,900 feet per second, delivering significant kinetic energy upon impact, capable of penetrating aircraft armor, igniting fuel tanks, and destroying engines with just a few accurately placed hits. By the conclusion of 1944, 14 out of the 15 fighter squadrons of the U.S. 8th Air Force in Europe were comprised of Mustangs, underscoring the aircraft's superiority over all other available fighters. This extensive production and deployment reflected the peak of American industrial capacity, with assembly lines operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. North American Aviation's factories, located in Englewood, California, and Dallas, Texas, were producing P-51s at an astonishing rate. At peak production, a new Mustang emerged from the assembly line every hour. By the end of the war, a total of 15,586 P-51s of all variants would have been manufactured, with the D model alone accounting for 8,956 aircraft, surpassing Japan's total production of all fighter types in the last 2 years of the war combined. The exceptional long-range capability that enabled Mustangs to reach Tokyo represented a revolutionary shift in fighter operations, altering the fundamental principles of air warfare. Equipped with dual 110-gallon drop tanks, Mustangs could routinely complete round trips of 1,500 statute miles, although pilots would extend this to 1,600 miles when necessary. This distance was comparable to flying from Los Angeles to Little Rock, Arkansas, entirely over water in a single-engine aircraft with no alternate landing sites other than the ocean. The key to this accomplishment was the Merlin engine's remarkable fuel efficiency at cruise settings, consuming only 65 gallons at economical cruise, combined with the P-51's laminar flow wing design that reduced drag by 35% compared to traditional airfoils. The laminar flow wing, created by Edgar Schmood, an aerodynamicist at North American, ensured a smooth airflow over a larger portion of the wing surface, which delayed the shift to turbulent flow and significantly decreased parasitic drag. In the stark contrast, the Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate, which began operational service with the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service in June 1944, arrived too late and in insufficient numbers to influence the outcome of the war. Known as Gale and referred to as Frank by the Allies, this fighter symbolized Japan's urgent effort to compete with American technological dominance using the limited resources available to the beleaguered empire. The K-84 is widely regarded as the most effective Japanese fighter to be deployed in significant quantities during the conflict, although the term large numbers is relative. What Japan viewed as mass production, the United States would classify as prototype runs. The aircraft featured high speed and exceptional maneuverability, armed with up to 230 mm Ho one P-51 5 cannons and 220 mm 5 cannons, providing it with impressive firepower. However, the reality was more intricate. The 30 mm cannons were limited to only 50 rounds each, while the 20 mm cannons had just 150 rounds per gun, resulting in a total ammunition capacity of merely 400 rounds, in contrast to the Mustang's 1,880 to 280 rounds. On paper, the Ki-84 seemed competitive and even superior in certain aspects. It was equipped with the Nakajima 45 Huma 18-cylinder radial engine, a sophisticated piece of equipment featuring fuel injection and a single-stage two-speed supercharger that utilized water methanol injection to assist the supercharger in delivering a rated 2,000 horsepower at takeoff. Initial tests indicated potential, with prototypes achieving speeds of 380 mpb in level flight, and later claims of reaching up to 427 mph under optimal conditions with high-octane fuel and perfect engine tuning. Nevertheless, the reality of late-war Japanese production presented a starkly different narrative characterized by declining quality, desperate improvisation, and systemic failures. Pilots and crews operating in the field became adept at managing the high maintenance requirements of the Nakajima Hama engine and the landing gear, which were susceptible to buckling at the most inopportune times. Although the Hama engine was theoretically powerful and advanced, it was plagued by persistent reliability issues that intensified as quality control measures deteriorated. The engine demanded precise tolerances that Japanese factories, under the relentless B-29 bombardment and deprived of quality steel and aluminum, could no longer uphold. Numerous landing gear units were compromised due to the inferior heat treatment of late-war Japanese steel, which often contained impurities that rendered proper hardening unfeasible. Consequently, many Hayates experienced strut failures upon landing, resulting in the loss of aircraft that Japan could ill afford and the deaths of pilots who had undergone extensive training. The decline in production quality mirrored the larger industrial crisis confronting Japan, a nation that had staked everything on a brief conflict and ultimately failed. In contrast, American factories upheld consistent quality standards despite their massive production outputs, even enhancing quality as production methods improved, while Japanese manufacturing experienced a sharp decline. The ongoing deterioration in quality control left pilots uncertain about the performance of individual aircraft, including whether the brakes would function, whether the engine would remain intact under high power settings, and even whether they could ascend sufficiently to intercept B-29 superfortresses flying at 30,000 feet. By 1945, Japan had manufactured only 3,514 Ki-84s in total, with many of these aircraft grounded due to shortages of spare parts, fuel, or qualified pilots. Of those that remained operational, only about half could be deemed truly combat-ready at any given moment. The fuel crisis alone underscored the strategic disaster confronting Japan, a nation that had entered the war in part to secure oil resources. While American pilots utilized 100-octane aviation gasoline sourced from refineries in Texas and California, which was specifically designed for high-performance engines, Japanese pilots had to rely on whatever fuel could be produced domestically or synthesized from coal. By the late stages of the war, Japanese aviation fuel frequently tested at 87 octane or lower, with some instances dropping to as low as 80 octane, which deprived engines of power and led to pre-ignition that damaged cylinders, pistons, and valves. In a desperate attempt, some units tried to enhance their fuel with pine root oil extracted from pine stumps, alcohol distilled from sweet potatoes, and even byproducts from sake production, which further compromised engine performance and reliability. Pilots reported engines that struggled to start, operated roughly at all power settings, and often experienced catastrophic failures during flight. On the initial mission of April 7th, the Mustangs assembled with their charges 103 Boeing B-29 Super Fortresses from the 73rd Bomb Wing, each loaded with tons of incendiary bombs aimed at Japanese industrial targets. Captain Art Bridge of the 45th Fighter Squadron reminisced, "It was a real spectacle. The 29ths were just completing their formation in a grand circle as we arrived. The sun reflected off their aluminum skin, and they resembled a school of giant silver fish swimming through the sky." The rendezvous itself was a testament to navigation and planning that would have been unachievable without American technological superiority. The P-51s had traversed 750 miles over open ocean, primarily navigating by dead reckoning and basic radio compass, timing their arrival to coincide with the bomber's schedule within minutes. They had gradually ascended from sea level to 25,000 feet, with their engines automatically adjusting the mixture as they climbed, and their superchargers seamlessly transitioning from low to high blower to sustain power. As the P-51 pilots crossed the coast of Honshu, they discarded their 110-gallon auxiliary wing tanks upon noticing the initial head-on feints from over 100 Japanese interceptors that were scrambling from various airfields around Tokyo. The silver drop tanks fell to the earth, shimmering in the morning sunlight, with some detonating upon impact while others bounced across rice paddies. The Japanese pilots, operating a diverse array of K-84s, K-43s, K-44s, K-61s, and Navy fighters, including Zeros and the newly introduced N-1 K-2J Shiden Kai, were taken aback. These were not the Navy's carrier fighters with restricted range. Rather, they were land-based fighters that had somehow made their way to the homeland from bases that seemed impossibly far away. Flight Sergeant Totanamizu, piloting a Kai-84 with the 56th Senti, later recounted his astonishment. "When we were scrambled, we were informed that enemy fighters were approaching Tokyo. We assumed it was a mistake. Perhaps they meant enemy bombers. Upon seeing the Mustangs with my own eyes, I thought I was in a dream. It was inconceivable. Our commanders had assured us that no American fighter could reach Japan from their island bases. Yet, there they were, dozens of them flying as if they owned our skies. In that instant, I realized the war was genuinely lost." Major James B. Tapp, who would later become an ace with 8 confirmed victories, was among the first Mustang pilots to engage a formation of Japanese fighters. His combat report, written hours after the mission, detailed the encounter with clinical accuracy. "They approached us in the conventional 3-plane shot formation, but their coordination was lacking. The flight leader would initiate an attack, yet his wingman frequently failed to follow through. They appeared hesitant, possibly low on fuel or ammunition, or simply inexperienced. We dove through their ranks with a 100-meter speed advantage, unleashed quick bursts, and zoomed back to altitude before they could respond." This disintegration of Japanese tactical coordination highlighted the severe crisis in pilot training that had escalated to catastrophic levels. By 1945, the majority of seasoned Japanese pilots had perished, having been killed over the Solomons, New Guinea, the Philippines, or during the Marianas Turkey shoot. New replacements received as little as 50 hours of flight training before being thrust into combat, in stark contrast to the 600 hours that American pilots underwent prior to their deployment in combat zones. When the smoke settled and the Mustangs returned to their Iwo Jima base, the Sunsetters of the 7th Fighter Command were credited with the destruction of 26 Japanese aircraft, 1 probable kill and 5 damaged at the expense of 2 P-51s and 1 pilot. The 13-to-1 kill ratio achieved during this initial mission would only improve as American pilots gained more experience over Japan, while the quality of Japanese pilots continued to decline. Within a few weeks, kill ratios of 20-to-1 or even 30-to-1 became commonplace, reflecting not only American superiority but also Japanese desperation. The performance gap between the aircraft became glaringly evident in combat, especially in the vertical dimension, where air combat increasingly took place. The superiority of the P-51D was particularly noticeable above 20,000 feet, the altitude at which most interceptions occurred. At these heights, the Merlin engine's 2-stage supercharger maintained sea-level power, while Japanese engines struggled to perform. The first stage compressed the thin air, cooled it through an intercooler, and then fed it to the second stage for further compression, delivering dense, oxygen-rich air to the cylinders. In contrast, the Ki-84's single-stage supercharger, which lacked an intercooler and a second stage, caused power to drop significantly above 20,000 feet, diminishing its speed advantage and climb rate precisely where most interceptions took place. At 30,000 feet, the Ki-84 could barely sustain 350 mph, while the P-51D could still reach 420 mm out of hill. Lieutenant Jerry Yellen of the 78th Fighter Squadron, who would execute the final combat mission of the war on August 14th, 1945, which was August 15th in Japan, recounted a typical engagement with remarkable detail. We would observe them ascending to confront us, leaving dark exhaust trails as they fully opened their throttles. However, at 25,000 feet, they were floundering like fish out of water. Their engines were emitting smoke, likely due to running too rich as their superchargers failed to supply sufficient air. We would plunge through their formation with our 650s firing, the traces appearing like laser beams, and they simply could not keep up with our speed during the dive or our subsequent zoom climb. Our Merlin engine would roar as we ascended, G-forces pressing us into our seats, while their radial engines would cough and sputter, struggling to sustain power. The P-51D was capable of diving at speeds nearing 500 mph while retaining control authority, its laminar flow wings remaining effective even in the transonic regime. In contrast, Japanese fighters frequently faced control reversal or structural failure at speeds exceeding 400 millicu in a dive, with their control surfaces becoming ineffective or their wings tearing off. The disparity in pilot quality was severe and worsened with each passing day. American pilots arriving at Iwo Jima typically possessed 400 to 600 hours of flight experience, including over 100 hours in type, numerous hours of gunnery practice, and extensive combat training under seasoned instructors flying captured enemy aircraft or precise simulations. They had rehearsed formation flying until it became second nature. Instrument navigation in all weather conditions, deflection, shooting at towed targets, and combat tactics developed from 3 years of air warfare experience. In 1945, Japanese pilots frequently had fewer than 100 total flight hours, with some having as few as 30 hours. Their gunnery practice was minimal due to shortages of ammunition, and they lacked instrument training. Combat tactics were learned from manuals instead of from experienced instructors who were either deceased or engaged in combat missions themselves. The navigation difficulties alone distinguished the capable pilots from those destined for failure, separating the living from those who would soon perish. Operating single-engine fighters on 1,500-meter round trips across a vast ocean with limited navigation aids necessitated a confidence derived from experience and trust in both the aircraft and support systems. In contrast, American pilots benefited from comprehensive weather briefings that were compiled from submarine weather reports and reconnaissance flights. They utilized accurate maps that were regularly updated through photo reconnaissance and relied on functioning instruments manufactured to exact specifications. Additionally, they had rescue submarines positioned along their flight paths known as Lifeguard League submarines, which saved numerous downed airmen. They could also depend on Dumbo PBY Catalina flying boats for rescue if they were forced to land in the water. Japanese pilots, on the other hand, increasingly relied on outdated maps that failed to reflect recent bomb damage, used unreliable compasses that had not been properly calibrated, and faced a lack of rescue options if they were downed over water. Their life rafts, if available, often leaked, and their emergency rations were typically depleted due to food shortages on land. In 1945, the magnetic variation between Yu and Tokyo was 3 degrees west, given that Tokyo is situated between the 139th and 140th meridians, while Yu was located between the 141st and 142nd. Navigation was simplified to basic compass headings for the return journey, a fortunate geographic coincidence that preserved many American lives. This geographic advantage became critical when weather conditions worsened or when pilots became disoriented during combat, causing their compasses to spin erratically as they maneuvered. A pilot could simply head south-southeast, confident that he would eventually spot Iwo Jima's distinctive Mount Suribachi rising from the ocean, provided he had sufficient fuel. The logistics that supported each military force unveiled the fundamental characteristics of the Pacific Air War, which was fundamentally a struggle between American abundance and Japanese scarcity. Each mission, originating from Iwo Jima, involved nearly 100 Mustangs that consumed 57,000 gallons of high-octane fuel and transported 230,000 rounds of C-50 caliber ammunition, in addition to bombs and rockets intended for ground attack operations. This accounted for merely 1 day's worth of operations from a single base, with 3 fighter groups functioning from Iwo Jima alone. Supporting this effort was a supply chain that extended back to factories in Detroit, refineries in Texas, and ammunition plants in Missouri, all interconnected by Liberty ships produced at a rate of 3 per day, along with C-54 Sky transport aircraft that regularly flew cargo routes across the Pacific. Ships arrived at Iwo Jima on a daily basis, unloading fuel, ammunition, spare parts, food, mail, and the myriad other items necessary to maintain a modern air force in operational status. In stark contrast, Japanese logistics had descended into chaos and desperation. Aviation fuel was so limited that training flights were cancelled, leaving new pilots to confront combat without recent flying experience. Ammunition was rationed, even for combat operations, with pilots instructed to conserve rounds for only the most assured shots. The Japanese Navy and Army Air Forces, which had never coordinated well even during the best of times, now competed frantically for dwindling resources, akin to starving dogs fighting over scraps. Aircraft were stripped for spare parts until they were reduced to mere aluminum skeletons, and entire fighter groups were grounded due to shortages of tires, spark plugs, or hydraulic fluid. Some units endeavored to produce their own spare parts in rudimentary workshops, yielding predictably poor results. The gap in technological sophistication extended beyond the aircraft themselves to encompass every facet of operations. American aviators donned suits designed to prevent blackouts during hygiene maneuvers by redirecting blood flow back to the brain. They utilized standardized oxygen systems that operated reliably at altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet, equipped with automatic flow regulation and communicated through VHF radios that provided clear reception across multiple channels. Their parachutes underwent regular inspections and repacking. The life rafts they carried were equipped with functional radios and fresh supplies, while their survival kits contained a range of items from morphine to fishing equipment. In contrast, Japanese pilots frequently operated without functional radios. Their vacuum tube radios drained valuable battery life and seldom functioned correctly. They relied on unreliable oxygen systems that often failed at altitudes above 20,000 feet, resulting in hypoxia and disorientation, and lacked suits, which hindered their ability to engage in aggressive maneuvers like their American counterparts without risking blackouts or sustaining broken blood vessels in their eyes. On June 1st, 1945, a day referred to as Black Friday by the Mustang men, it was the weather rather than enemy action that posed the greatest threat, highlighting the limitations of even American technology. Approximately 150 Mustangs en route to Osaka encountered a blinding frontal system that was not predicted by weather forecasts. Within minutes, 27 aircraft were lost, with 24 of those losses attributed to weather conditions. Pilots became disoriented in towering cumulus clouds, collided with one another, or simply ran out of fuel while searching for clear air. This catastrophe underscored that even for the technologically advanced Americans, long-range missions pushed both personnel and equipment to their utmost limits. The weather front extended from sea level to 40,000 feet, characterized by violent turbulence, icing conditions, and complete lack of visibility. Pilots reported witnessing St. Elmo's fire flickering on their wings, compasses spinning aimlessly, and artificial horizons tumbling as their gyroscopes struggled to cope with the chaotic motion. The repercussions on Japanese morale were devastating and irreversible. Captain Yoshio Yoshida, an essential 84 pilot from the 47th Senti who survived the conflict, recorded in his diary, "The emergence of American fighters over Tokyo has completely shattered our confidence. We were informed that the B-29s were defenseless, without escort, and that their fighters could never reach such distances. Now we witness Mustangs over the palace itself, strafing our airfields in broad daylight, shooting down our finest pilots as if they were novices. How can we protect the Emperor when the enemy's fighters roam freely over our sacred homeland?" The sight of those Mustangs, adorned with their invasion stripes, so confident and numerous, reveals to us what our leaders refuse to acknowledge. The war is lost, and we are merely awaiting our demise. VLR missions were a true test of flying skill, stated Major Tapp in a post-war interview. Engaging with Japanese fighter pilots heightened your adrenaline, yet navigating from point A to point B was the most challenging aspect. The ocean was boundless, featureless, and hypnotic. You would constantly check your compass, questioning its accuracy, wondering if you had somehow veered off course. The physical and mental strain was immense and cumulative. Pilots remained strapped into their cockpits for over 8 hours, unable to stand, stretch, or relieve themselves except into a relief tube that frequently froze at altitude. They endured cramping legs that felt as though they were being pierced with needles, numb buttocks that made them question if they would ever walk again, and the persistent anxiety of piloting a single-engine aircraft over vast expanses of empty ocean, where a single mechanical failure could lead to almost certain death. The Mustang's cockpit ergonomics, honed through 3 years of combat experience and thousands of pilot reports, demonstrated superiority over Japanese designs in every measurable aspect. The P-51D was equipped with a bubble canopy that provided 360-degree visibility. Pilots could actually look behind them by turning their heads, a life-saving feature in combat. The seat was fully adjustable to accommodate pilots of varying heights. The rudder pedals were adjustable to suit various leg lengths, and the controls were strategically placed to minimize pilot fatigue during extended missions. The instrument panel was organized logically, with the most critical instruments, airspeed, altitude, and engine gauges positioned directly within the pilot's line of sight. Although the Ki-84's cockpit represented an advancement over earlier Japanese fighters such as the Zero, it still faced challenges with rear visibility due to structural components and the fuel tank located behind the pilot's head. Additionally, the controls were awkwardly positioned, necessitating that pilots remove their hands from the stick at crucial moments, and the instruments were hard to read under combat conditions, particularly when experiencing G-forces or when engine vibrations caused blurriness. Differences in armament were pivotal in determining combat outcomes, often influencing survival in the split-second confrontations typical of aerial warfare. The P-51D's 650 caliber machine guns, while appearing less formidable than the Ki-84's mixed cannon armament, provided significant advantages that combat experience had shown to be critical. The American guns were remarkably dependable, with stoppage rates below 1% when properly maintained, which was consistently ensured by dedicated armament specialists. They carried a substantially larger ammunition load totaling 980 rounds compared to the Ki-84's 400 rounds for its combined cannon and machine guns. This allowed American pilots to take ranging shots, engage multiple targets, and not worry about depleting their ammunition after only a few seconds of firing. The ballistics of the .050 caliber rounds were so well understood that American pilots could reliably target enemies at 400 yards. In contrast, Japanese pilots with mixed cannon and machine gun armament faced difficulties with convergence zones and varying ballistic trajectories, as their cannon rounds descended differently than their machine gun rounds, rendering accurate shooting nearly impossible beyond close range. The disparity in gunnery training was even more evident. American pilots had discharged thousands of rounds during their training, mastering the skills to lead targets, estimate distances, and fire in short bursts to prevent their guns from overheating. They honed their skills on towed sleeves with camera guns and in simulated dogfights until deflection shooting became second nature. In contrast, Japanese pilots in 1945 were fortunate to fire even 100 rounds during their training. If that, ammunition was deemed too valuable to squander on training exercises when it was essential for combat. Many entered their first combat engagements having never fired their weapons at all, attempting to learn deflection shooting while under enemy fire. The last aerial combat of the Sunsetters took place near Tokyo on August 10th, 1945, when the 15th and 56th Fighter Groups claimed 7 kills in what would be one of the final air battles of World War II. By this time, Japanese resistance had diminished to a mere shadow of the formidable force that had once dominated the Pacific. Fuel shortages resulted in most Japanese fighters being grounded, their fuel tanks drained to supply kamikaze aircraft. Those who did take to the skies were often teenagers with minimal training, boys who had only recently been in high school. Overall, EWO's Mustangs were credited with shooting down 206 Japanese aircraft between April and August 1945, accounting for 75% of the Pacific P-51 aerial victories. The actual figure was likely higher, as many Japanese planes downed over Japan were never officially confirmed, their wreckage lost in forests or urban settings. The strategic ramifications extended well beyond aerial victories, fundamentally altering the course of the entire Pacific War. The presence of P-51s over Japan allowed B-29s to conduct daylight bombing missions with enhanced accuracy, systematically dismantling Japan's industrial infrastructure. Japanese industrial output, already weakened by material shortages and B-29 raids, came to a standstill under the relentless precision of daylight bombing. The psychological impact was equally catastrophic. Japanese civilians witnessed American fighter planes strafing airfields in broad daylight, targeting trains and attacking shipping in Tokyo Bay, clearly indicating that Japan had lost control over its airspace. The illusion of the divine wind that was supposed to safeguard Japan was dispelled when American fighters flew directly over the Imperial Palace. Lieutenant Colonel John R. Morgan of the 457th Fighter Squadron undertook several photo reconnaissance missions over Japan in a specially modified P-51D equipped with cameras instead of guns. His findings exposed the extent of the collapse of Japanese aviation. We would fly over airfields that intelligence indicated housed hundreds of aircraft, yet we would discover perhaps a dozen operational planes. The remainder were abandoned, lacking engines and propellers. Some were merely shells stripped for parts. They would maneuver wrecks around to create the illusion of having more operational aircraft for our photo interpreters, but we could distinguish between a genuine airplane and a hulk. Certain airfields displayed fake wooden aircraft, complete with painted insignia, attempting to divert our attacks from actual planes concealed in revetments or camouflaged. The industrial mathematics were undeniable and narrated the war's story in stark figures. The United States manufactured 15,586 P-51s of all variants during the conflict, surpassing Japan's total production of all aircraft types in 1944 and 1945 combined. Japan succeeded in producing approximately 3,500 K-84s, but many were destroyed on the ground by B-29 raids and carrier strikes, lost in training accidents due to inadequate quality control, or grounded due to a lack of parts. American production lines were reaching their peak just as Japanese production was collapsing. North American aviation alone was producing 20 P-51s daily at peak production, exceeding the number of Ki-84s Japan produced in an entire month. Each American aircraft was fundamentally identical with interchangeable parts, whereas Japanese aircraft exhibited significant variations in quality and performance even within the same production batch. The training pipeline illustrated a comparable narrative of significant American superiority. By 1945, the United States was preparing 30,000 pilots each year, with each pilot undergoing 200 to 300 hours of flight training prior to advanced fighter instruction, followed by an additional 100 hours of combat training. In contrast, Japan's pilot training initiative had virtually disintegrated, with new pilots receiving perhaps 50 hours of training before being deployed to operational units, often even less. The calculations of attrition were relentless. America was capable of replenishing losses while upholding quality. Japan, however, could not replace its losses, even with drastically lowered standards. For every pilot trained by Japan, America trained 10, and the American pilots were significantly better equipped. Fuel consumption starkly highlighted the strategic conclusion. Each P-51 mission from Iwo Jima utilized approximately 600 gallons of 100-octane fuel per aircraft, including internal fuel and drop tanks. With 100 aircraft per mission and daily operations, this resulted in 60,000 gallons per day for a single fighter group. American tankers supplied millions of gallons monthly to Pacific bases, creating a continuous flow of fuel across the Pacific. Meanwhile, Japan was trying to extract aviation fuel from pine roots, needing 200 pine stumps to yield 1 gallon of barely usable fuel, and converting training aircraft into kamikaze weapons due to a lack of fuel for standard operations. By August 1945, Japan had less than 200,000 gallons of aviation fuel left in the home islands, sufficient for perhaps one significant operation. The technological advancement represented by the P-51D transcended mere performance metrics to encapsulate an entire warfare philosophy. The aircraft represented American industrial principles, emphasizing mass production with quality control, standardization among manufacturers, and ongoing enhancement based on combat experiences. Every P-51D that came off the production line was fundamentally identical, featuring interchangeable parts and predictable performance. A pilot could enter any P-51D and immediately understand its flight characteristics as well as the location of every switch and instrument. In contrast, Japanese aircraft, which were increasingly handcrafted with varying quality materials and substitute components, exhibited significant performance discrepancies even within the same production run. For instance, one Ki-84 might achieve speeds of 400 mph, while another from the same factory could struggle to surpass 350 mph due to manufacturing inconsistencies. Brigadier General Ernest M. Moore, the commander of the 7th Fighter Command, later stated, "I don't believe there is any question about the P-51 being the best prop fighter of World War II. It was our premier air fighter, making it ideal for escort missions and comparable to the P-47 in ground attack roles." This evaluation encompassed not only the aircraft's performance, but also its reliability, ease of maintenance, and adaptability to the rigorous demands of extended range operation. The P-51 could be refueled and rearmed within 30 minutes, had the capability to fly twice daily if necessary, and could operate from rough coral runways that would have incapacitated more fragile aircraft. The maintenance statistics were revealing and highlighted another aspect of American superiority. P-51Ds at Iwo Jima maintained an operational rate exceeding 80% despite challenging conditions. Volcanic dust infiltrated everything, salt air, corroded aluminum, and limited facilities meant that most maintenance was conducted outdoors. Ground crews could execute engine replacements in 4 hours using mobile cranes and standardized procedures, and battle damage that would sideline a Japanese fighter for weeks could be repaired overnight with prefabricated parts flown in from the United States. The Ki-84, even when fuel and ammunition were accessible, experienced serviceability rates below 40% and at times as low as 20%. The intricate Humar engine necessitated specialized tools that frequently were unavailable. Skilled technicians who were predominantly deceased or conscripted into combat units, and spare parts that required manual fitting due to poor manufacturing tolerances. Weather reconnaissance offered another vital advantage that preserved numerous American lives. Committed B-29s undertook weather reconnaissance missions hours prior to fighter operations, providing reports on cloud conditions, wind speeds, and frontal systems. These weather reconnaissance aircraft delivered comprehensive meteorological data that assisted in planning routes to circumvent the most severe weather. However, as demonstrated on Black Friday, weather could still catch even the most well-prepared missions off guard. Japanese forces, lacking such capabilities, often operated without knowledge of the weather, leading to the destruction of entire formations. The American capacity to forecast and evade weather fronts significantly diminished operational losses. In contrast, Japanese units experienced catastrophic weather-related losses that surpassed combat casualties, while the communication infrastructure supporting American operations was groundbreaking for its era. High-frequency radio beacons transmitted from submarines and island bases, submarine-based rescue coordination could direct search aircraft to downed pilots, and real-time weather updates established a safety network that instilled confidence in pilots to exploit the extreme range capabilities of their aircraft. The psychological reassurance of knowing that if you were to go down, someone would be searching for you is immeasurable. Japanese pilots, often flying without functional radios and devoid of hope for rescue if they were forced down, approached each mission with a fatalistic acceptance of likely death. Their farewell ceremonies prior to missions were literal, as they anticipated never returning. Captain Harry Krim Jr. of the 531st Fighter Squadron, who would later become an ace over Japan with 7 victories, recognized the strategic reality with stark clarity. We dominated the skies over Japan. We could go wherever we wished, whenever we wished. The Japanese were aware of this. We were aware of this. Most importantly, the Japanese civilians were aware of this reality. Each P-51 flying over Tokyo served as evidence that Japan had lost the war. We were no longer engaged in a struggle for air superiority. We had already achieved it. Our actions were merely a demonstration, a way to emphasize their helplessness and illustrate that resistance was futile. The extensive long-range missions fundamentally altered the strategic landscape in the Pacific, rendering all prior assessments irrelevant. Japan could no longer depend on distance to safeguard the home islands, which had been protected by the tyranny of distance for centuries. The industrial heartland, which had remained relatively unscathed during 3 years of conflict, was now vulnerable to daily assaults. The sight of American fighters over Tokyo shattered the final illusions regarding Japan's capacity for self-defense, obliterated the myth of the divine wind, and made it evident that defeat was not merely a possibility, but an inevitability. The human toll starkly illustrated the technological gap in harsh numerical terms. Between July 1st and August 15th, 1945, a total of 85 American fighter pilots lost their lives on very long-range missions, yet only a few were lost in air-to-air combat, perhaps 5 or 6. The majority of losses were due to operational issues, including weather, mechanical failures, navigation mistakes, or sheer exhaustion leading pilots to make fatal errors. In contrast, Japanese pilot losses during the same time frame were in the hundreds, possibly exceeding 1,000, with entire squadrons wiped out in vain attempts to intercept American formations. The 47th Centi, which began April with 40 operational pilots, had dwindled to just 3 by August. The 244th Centi was entirely annihilated, reconstituted with new pilots, and then destroyed once more. The final dogfights over Japan revealed the complete disintegration of Japanese air power as a coordinated force. On August 14th, 1945, which was August 15th in Japan due to the international dateline, Lieutenant Jerry Yellen undertook what would be the last combat mission of the war. Departing from Iwo Jima alongside his wingman, 19-year-old Second Lieutenant Philip Schlamberg, they launched an assault on airfields in the vicinity of Nagoya. This mission had been organized prior to the notification of Japan's surrender reaching the base, and the code word Utah, which would have signaled their return, never made it to their radios. Yellen and Schlamberg engaged their targets with gunfire and then turned back home, maneuvering into a cloud formation to evade anti-aircraft fire. Upon Yellen's emergence from the clouds, Schlamberg was missing, having been shot down by ground fire, marking him as the last American combat casualty of World War II. Even in the face of defeat, with the war coming to a close and the Emperor having already recorded his surrender announcement, Japanese anti-aircraft units continued to fire with a sense of desperate resolve. However, Japanese fighter planes were conspicuously absent. They had effectively ceased to function as a viable force, hindered by a shortage of fuel, a lack of pilots, or simply obliterated. The arithmetic of the air conflict was conclusive and undeniable. It was inscribed in aluminum and blood across the skies of Japan. The P-51D Mustang, boasting a top speed of 440 mph for a range of 2,000 miles with drop tanks and 6 dependable machine guns with nearly 2,000 rounds of ammunition, had rendered the Japanese home islands vulnerable to daylight air assaults. The K-84 Hayate, despite its theoretical advantages and the bravery of its pilots, lacked the necessary numbers, reliability, or quality of pilots to mount a successful defense. This was not a competition between equals, but rather a predetermined outcome, influenced as much by factories in Detroit and oil fields in Texas as by aerial combat over Tokyo. The industrial strength of America, exemplified by the remarkable P-51 Mustang, accomplished what naval blockades and island-hopping campaigns could not: the total eradication of Japan's capacity to protect its airspace. The B-29s that released atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki operated without fighter escort, not due to a lack of availability, but because none was required. The Japanese fighter opposition was decisively eliminated from the skies, overwhelmed by the superior American technology, training, and production capabilities. Of the 3,514 K-84s manufactured, only one remains today. It is housed in the Chiron Peace Museum in Kagoshima, Japan, serving as a solitary testament to Japan's futile effort to compete with American technological dominance. In contrast, hundreds of P-51 Mustangs continue to exist in museums and private collections around the globe. Many are still operational at air shows, their Merlin engines resonating with the melody of American industrial success 7 decades after they first graced the skies over Tokyo. The difference in the number of surviving aircraft narrates its own tale. American planes were constructed for longevity, meticulously maintained, and regarded as historical treasures. Conversely, Japanese aircraft were designed for immediate deployment, anticipated to be lost in combat, and treated as disposable. The astonishment faced by Japanese pilots when encountering P-51 Mustangs over Tokyo extended beyond mere tactical surprise. It was a profound realization that American industrial strength and technological progress had rendered what seemed impossible into a routine occurrence. Single-engine fighters executing 1,500 meters combat missions, arriving with sufficient fuel to engage for 2 hours and safely return to base, was beyond the comprehension or capability of the Japanese. The P-51D Mustang, soaring over Mount Fuji, was not merely an aircraft. It symbolized American industrial dominance, technological advancement, and the relentless mathematics of total warfare. The lesson was stark and unforgiving. In the realm of modern industrial warfare, superior technology multiplied by extensive production equates to victory. The P-51D Mustang epitomized American industry at its zenith, with over 15,000 aircraft produced with consistent quality, piloted by highly trained aviators, supported by boundless logistics, and deployed with strategic accuracy. In the face of this, Japan's K-84 Hayate, despite individual bravery and sporadic tactical achievements, had no chance. The astonishment of American fighters over Tokyo ultimately stemmed from the shock of mathematical reality. This reality culminated in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, executed by B-29s that no longer required fighter escorts due to the obliteration of Japanese air power. The Mustangs had accomplished their mission with ruthless efficiency. They demonstrated that distance offered no protection, that industrial strength surpassed warrior spirit, and that technological superiority, when effectively utilized, was unbeatable. The Japanese pilots who confronted them in those final months learned the most difficult lesson of modern warfare. Mere courage cannot triumph over the mathematics of industrial production, technological progress, and logistical dominance. The P-51D Mustang over Tokyo served as evidence that the era of the samurai had concluded, supplanted by the era of the production line, the supercharger, and the extended range fighter escort. The divine wind was subdued by science, the warrior spirit was vanquished by industrial power, and the empire of the rising sun was eclipsed by wings of aluminum and engines of steel.